Chapter 3: Accidental Culture versus Intentional Culture. Every organization has a culture. That's not the question. The real question is whether the culture was built on purpose or whether it was formed by accident. Most leaders believe culture is something you get once things settle down, once the right people are hired, once the numbers stabilize, once there's time to focus on it. Until then, culture is assumed to be a byproduct of good intentions and hard work. That assumption is costly. Culture doesn't wait for permission, it forms immediately, shaped by what leaders tolerate or what they reward and how they behave when pressure hits. Long before values are written down or meetings are scheduled, culture is already teaching people what really matters. I learned this the hard way. Early in my leadership journey, I believed culture would take care of itself if I focused on execution. If we hit our targets, stayed busy, and solved problems quickly, the rest would fall into place. I cared about people. I worked hard. I assumed that was enough. It wasn't. What I didn't realize at the time was that while I focused on results, a culture was forming around me, quietly, consistently, and without my consent. Not because I was doing something wrong intentionally, but because I wasn't being intentional at all. That's how accidental cultures are born. An accidental culture is not a toxic culture. That's what makes it dangerous. Accidental cultures are often filled with good people doing their best. The problem isn't attitude, it's direction. Expectations are implied instead of clarified. Decisions are made inconsistently. Accountability depends on who's involved and how busy leadership happens to be that day. People learn the rules not from a handbook, but from observations. They watch how leaders respond to mistakes. They notice who gets listened to and who doesn't. They see which problems get addressed and which ones get ignored. They feel when urgency replaces clarity. Over time, patterns form. Those patterns are the culture. I remember realizing something was off, not because performance had collapsed, but because it had stalled. The work was getting done, but energy was uneven. Some people leaned in, others stayed quiet. Accountability existed, but it wasn't shared. Everything still worked, but it felt heavier than it should have. The harder I pushed, the less ownership I saw. That's when it hit me. We weren't aligned, we were surviving. Accidental cultures survive on effort. Intentional cultures grow through clarity. Intentional culture doesn't mean perfect culture, it means designed culture. An intentional culture is built when leaders stop assuming people understand expectations and start making them explicit. It forms when values stop being aspirational language and start becoming decision filters. It shows up when leaders recognize that every interaction reinforces what is acceptable and what is not. Intentional culture requires leaders to answer uncomfortable questions honestly. What behaviors do we actually reward here? What do we tolerate because it's easier than addressing? Where are people confused but afraid to say it out loud? What happens when someone makes a mistake? Those answers exist whether leaders ask those questions or not. The shift for me came when I realized culture wasn't something I could delegate or announce. I couldn't outsource it to HR. I couldn't roll it out in a meeting. I couldn't fix it with a new slogan. Culture followed me. It showed up in how I prepared for meetings or didn't, in how I handled conflict or avoided it, in whether I chose clarity over comfort, in whether I led consistently or situationally. Once I saw that, everything changed. Accidental cultures are driven by reaction. Whatever problem is loudest gets attention. Whatever fire is closest gets addressed. Leadership energy is spent responding instead of guiding. Over time, people stop bringing issues forward unless they're urgent, because urgency becomes the only reliable way to get a response. That's not intentional leadership, that's triage. Intentional cultures are built before the pressure hits. Leaders decide in advance how they want people to work together, communicate, and solve problems. They establish expectations early and reinforce them often. They don't wait for conflict to define behavior. They define behavior before conflict arrives. That preparation matters. Under pressure, people don't rise to the level of written values. They fall to the level of practiced behavior. Intentional culture also removes ambiguity. In accidental cultures, people are left guessing. They wonder what matters most. They hesitate because they don't want to overstep. They play it safe because safety feels smarter than risk. In intentional cultures, people know where the guide rails are. They understand the purpose behind the decisions. They know how to disagree productively. They feel empowered to act because leadership has made expectations clear and backed them up consistently. Clarity replaces caution. There was a moment when I realized that culture was either going to be built by design or built by default. Doing nothing wasn't neutral. Being busy wasn't harmless. Assuming alignment wasn't leadership. If I didn't shape the culture intentionally, it would continue shaping itself around pressure, personalities, and past habits. And that version of culture would never scale. Intentional cultures require repetition. Leaders don't set expectations once, they reinforce them continuously. They model the behaviors they want to see. They address misalignment early before it hardens into resentment or avoidance. This takes discipline. It means having conversations that would be easier to postpone. It means slowing down to clarify when speed feels tempting. It means holding the same standard on hard days that you hold on calm ones. That consistency is what builds trust. And trust is what allows culture to hold under pressure. Accidental cultures ask people to figure it out as they go. Intentional cultures give people something solid to stand on. That difference shows up everywhere in engagement, in accountability, in resilience. When things go wrong, accidental cultures look for someone to blame. Intentional cultures look for something to learn. One survives pressure, the other grows from it. Culture isn't created by mission statements. It's created by leaders who understand that how work gets done matters as much as what gets done. Leaders who recognize that every choice, especially under pressure, either reinforces alignment or erodes it. It didn't become intentional overnight, but once I saw the difference, I couldn't unsee it. And neither will you. In the next chapter, we'll talk about what makes intentional culture possible even when pressure is high, leading with values, not when it's convenient, but when it costs you something. Because values don't matter when they're easy, they matter when they're tested. That concludes this episode of Built for Pressure. Built for Pressure is a copyrighted work by Richard Levene, all rights reserved. This content may not be reproduced, distributed, or repurposed without permission. If this episode resonated, you can find the full framework at richardlevene.com.